This is the outline of the Constitution. The Constitution is made up of 7 articles. You could think of them as chapters to a book, and the outline is just the table of contents. Each article has a different topic and a different purpose. The first is the legislative branch. It's also known as Congress. It's made up of the House of Representatives, which has 435 members nationwide, and the Senate, which has 100 total members. Their main purpose is to make laws. That's their very most important job. That's what they're elected to Congress to do, is just to make laws. Your representative for Minnesota is from District Number 2, and his name is John Klein. He's a Republican from Lakeville. So if you ever were to visit Washington, D.C., you'd want to contact his office a couple of months prior to heading out, and when you're out there, if John Klein or one of his staffers is available, they will give you a tour of the Capitol building. The second article is the executive branch. That is just the president and his number of cabinets below him, which would include things like the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, the Treasury Secretary, and so on and so forth. The executive branch, their main purpose, or his or her main purpose, is to enforce the laws that the legislative branch creates. So things like Obamacare. Obamacare was actually passed by the United States Congress, but it is the job of the executive branch, specifically the President and the Health and Human Services Secretary, to carry out or to enforce the law. And that's what they are trying to do right now with very little success, is to carry out the Obamacare law that was passed by Congress. The President fulfills 8 roles. We'll talk more about that when we get to the executive branch more specifically. So we'll talk about those things later. The third article of the Constitution is the judicial branch. This is also known as the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is made up of 9 non-elected members who are appointed by the President and confirmed by the United States Senate. The Chief Justice right now is John Roberts, but their main job here is to apply and to also interpret the laws as effectively as possible. So they have what we've already talked about in class, the power of judicial review, and that's the ability to declare any act made by or any law passed by Congress or the executive branch to be unconstitutional. The fourth article of the Constitution is known as the Full Faith and Credit Clause. This effectively replaced the Articles of Confederation, but basically what the Full Faith and Credit Clause implies is that all states under the Union would be treated equally. So there'd be no extradition laws. Anyone who committed one crime in a state would have to return to the state where they committed that particular crime. Full faith and credit also means today that if you, as an investor, buy up loans, treasury notes, bonds, any kind of T-note from the United States government, if you invest in the United States government, that money that you invest is completely 100% safe, which means that when that note comes due, you will receive all of the principal amount that you put in, plus any interest that it earned. This is extremely important because today the United States has one of the best credit ratings in the world. So when there's a financial mess globally, most investors will take their investments and they'll place them in the United States government because it's the most important and most safe place to put your money in the world because of this article right here in the Constitution. This has also caused a bit of a problem for the United States because full faith and credit means that individuals receiving certain items such as Social Security or Medicare or any type of an entitlement program here in the United States deserves those types of things, and they cannot be taken from those individuals without their consent. And so that brings up a huge problem in that if we want to solve our budget crisis, we're going to have to severely amend and change our entitlement programs like Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. But in order to do that, this may have to be looked at, the full faith and credit clause. So it's a very important clause that we have in our Constitution today. The fifth article of the Constitution is just the amendments provision. It's the way we change the Constitution. It has only been done 27 times in the last 227 plus years, so it doesn't happen very often. We'll talk about a couple of different amendments in class, specifically the first 10, the Bill of Rights. But to change the Constitution, it can actually be done 4 different ways, but we're going to look at just the 2 main ways. It can be, to change the Constitution, you need the support of 2/3 of the House or Senate, or 38 of the states. With that, however, there has to be a confirmation. So if 2/3 of the House of Representatives and the United States Senate agree to change the Constitution, it has to be ratified by 38 states. Or vice versa, if 38 states propose a change to the Constitution, it has to be ratified by 2/3 of Congress, which makes up both the House and the Senate. So it's extremely difficult to do, to get 38 states on the same page to change our United States Constitution, and even to get 2/3 of both House members and Senate members. Some examples of amendments that have been proposed in the past include things like immigration reform, redefining the Second Amendment, defining when life begins, whether it begins at conception or maybe at a heartbeat. There have been other amendments that would provide for individuals not being natural born to become president of the United States. So there are a number of provisions, same-sex marriage being another one that could be a likely future amendment down the line somewhere. So we'll talk more about amendments in class. The Sixth Amendment, or Sixth Article rather, to the United States Constitution is the Supremacy Clause. And the Supremacy Clause basically states that whenever a United States law comes into conflict with a state law, the federal law / national or central law is the one that will always win or override the local or regional / state law. It means that the U.S. Constitution is the highest law of the land, and therefore no state law can override that federal law. And we'll look at a couple of cases in here. We did look at the Montana Firearms Act, which was created by Montana to basically keep the United States government from regulating their gun distribution, manufacturing, and production by making everything in the state and keeping everything in the state. But the federal government said that the Supremacy Clause still reigns over their state laws due to this part of our Constitution. And the last article of the Constitution is just the ratification. The ratification was there to replace the replace Articles of Confederation. At first, the founders thought that they should have all 13 states on board for ratification. There was a state that was holding out, and it was Rhode Island, and they couldn't get them to agree to the Articles of the new Constitution rather. So they said instead of needing 13 out of all 13, they basically said we only need 9, and that overthrew the Articles of Confederation and implemented the United States Constitution.